Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your not back to daily dose of Star Wars podcast joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. Because it's the 7th anniversary of The Last Jedi today, I thought it would be interesting to do a Jedi business episode. We haven't done one of these in a while, but there's of course a lot of discourse happening around The Last Jedi happening today. Surprise, surprise. And I thought it would be interesting to revisit things now that we have, the benefit of a few years of time to see just how successful The Last Jedi really was. So the biggest measure, of course, is the box office, and it made $1.33 billion at the box office. Just to give you some idea, that is the second most of any Star Wars movie, second, of course, to The Force Awakens. It beats out 7 of the 8 Harry Potter movies. It beats out 2 of the 3 Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. It beats out 2 of the 3 Lord of the Ring movies. It beats out every single MCU movie that isn't the Avengers, although I guess there's some argument about whether Deadpool and Wolverine is an MCU movie or not. If it is, then Deadpool Wolverine beat The Last Jedi by less than $4 million. If you look at inflation-adjusted numbers, which they only have for domestic box office, that puts it in the 40s or so, and that of course means that Gone with the Wind is the #1 box office movie of all time. But if you look at movies only released in this century, it's number 11 on that list, and it's only the 4th best Star Wars movie. Then it's that to the original Star Wars, of course, surprise, surprise, and then also The Phantom Menace and The Force Awakens, which also benefit from there not having been any Star Wars movies prior to that in 15 years and 10 years, respectively. Then there's just actual raw ticket sales. The Last Jedi is estimated to have sold more than 140 million tickets at the box office. That also makes it number 4 in the list of Star Wars movies. Again, the original Star Wars, The Phantom Menace, and The Force Awakens for, the same obvious reasons. And it still beats out a lot of those other movies that I mentioned as well. I think 2 of the Lord of the Rings movies beat it instead of just 1 on the dollar box office situation, but still, by ticket sales, absolutely a success. For critic scores on Rotten Tomatoes, it's in 4th place of all Star Wars movies behind the original, The Empire Strikes Back, and The Force Awakens. For Cinema Score and Post Track, those are the rating services that evaluate how fans reacted on opening night. It is one of the highest performers of any Star Wars movie since they started collecting that data. People gave it an A rating for Cinema Score, which was only matched by The Force Awakens and Rogue One. The post-track information was that 89% gave it a positive score and a 5 out of 5 star rating. And when you look at the list of all-time sales for Blu-ray DVDs, it's number 26 on the list, and it would be number 23 if you were only counting individual movies. So it was outsold by a box set of Harry Potter, a box set of Lord of the Rings, and a box set of the first 6 Star Wars movies. Now, that should be the end of the conversation, but of course it's not. And I've been thinking about this a little bit in light of current events, what's happened with the United Healthcare CEO and the so-called claims adjuster. There's an element to that situation that overlaps with The Last Jedi in a way, in the sense that healthcare and everything that is wrong with the healthcare system and how it affects people regardless of political stripe or spectrum, it's very similar to the concept that's presented to us in The Last Jedi, where the war that happens between the New Republic and the First Order, or whether it's the Galactic Empire and the Alliance to Restore the Republic, or any other battle, that ultimately there are people who are profiting from there being a fight. They are making money from both sides, regardless of what the conflict is, who is in power versus who's fighting against that power. It was kind of a revolutionary thing to be talking about in a mainstream movie, let alone a Star Wars movie, and yet it's also in line with the politics of Star Wars. And if The Last Jedi had come out 10 years earlier, say in 2007, like in the aftermath of the Iraq War and in the time leading up to the 2008 presidential election, where we were all trying to decide whether Barack Obama or John McCain was the right person to lead the country, I think it probably would have landed to great acclaim without any drama whatsoever. Instead, it came out in 2017, which was sort of the culmination of the moment, right? Because of the fact that racist and misogynist people had been able to make some noise around The Force Awakens in 2015, and then again more noise in 2016 over the female-led Ghostbusters reboot. Now we arrive in 2017 after election results in the US. That group of folks is emboldened even further. Media has been responsive to the things that they've been doing because it drives clicks, it drives advertising revenue, it drives readership. Kind of reminds me a little bit about Private Parts, right? The Howard Stern movie based on his autobiography, where they're talking about his ratings and that people who like him listen for 2.5 hours, and they do that. The number one reason they give is because they want to hear what he says next. But the people who hate him listen for 3.5 hours, and the number one reason they give for that is that they want to hear what he says next. And basically, mainstream media and fandom-based media glommed onto that. They wanted to hear what people had to say next. They wanted to hear what the people who loved it had to say next, but they wanted to hear what people who hated it had to say next even more. But all of that is just dust kicked up to obscure the fact that by any objective measure, by the dollars that it made at the box office, by the number of tickets it sold at the box office, by the number of DVDs it sold, by the critics' reviews, by the reviews of people coming out of the theater when they were, first seeing the movie, that The Last Jedi is one of the best Star Wars movies that's ever been made. That in itself is an achievement, but it's even more of an achievement when you consider, and we've talked about this on the podcast in season 1, about how J.J. Abrams basically forced Rian Johnson to make a remake, if you will, of The Empire Strikes Back by everything that JJ set up in The Force Awakens, and by essentially making a remake of the original Star Wars, but then also dragging in the moment of Luke and Rey meeting for the first time at the end of The Force Awakens, which is, Luke and Yoda meeting for the first time in the middle of The Empire Strikes Back. So it ends up basically making you have to compare The Empire Strikes Back and The Last Jedi. And for both of them, the first third and the last third are absolutely spectacular. The middle third is where the differences lie between those two movies. And I would say, unfortunately, that The Last Jedi suffers a little bit in comparison to The Empire Strikes Back. And the reason why that's the case is because of the level of urgency that is established in The Last Jedi that isn't established in The Empire Strikes Back, right? So once the rebels escape from Hoth, in The Empire Strikes Back, we have basically 3 different storylines, right? We have Luke and Yoda on Dagobah. We have Vader and the Empire's search for the rebels, and in particular, the Millennium Falcon. And then we have the Millennium Falcon hiding in the asteroid field. Now, Luke and Yoda on Dagobah is the same as Rey and Luke on Ahch-To, right? So that's a similar situation. The difference is really with Finn and Rose's story on Canto Bight and the O.J. Simpson slow-speed Bronco chase that's happening in space. Johnson tries to introduce some drama into that slow-speed chase by introducing the mutiny storyline, but yeah, it doesn't really ramp things up. And I think part of the reason why, and it has finally occurred to me over the last year or two, why it felt like this for me is that I remember the episode 33 from the Battlestar Galactica reboot. It was one of the very first episodes of the series, and the situation is that every 33 minutes, the Cylon fleet arrives wherever the Battlestar Galactica fleet is, and they have to jump away and get away from them, and then they have 33 minutes to recalibrate and rest and power up before the Cylons are going to arrive again. And this happens over the course of days and days and days. And there's a level of urgency in that episode that is so intense, and it's utterly missing from that aspect of The Last Jedi storyline. And that's really my only major complaint about the movie. You can make a case for arguing that Gwendolyn Christie as Captain Phasma was squandered, but then again, you could make a similar case for Boba Fett in The Empire Strikes Back and The Last Jedi, where, on screen for just a few minutes and had a big impact. And I think Phasma had the same, but I think we were hoping for more. Now, as for the trilogy that Rian Johnson was supposed to create, which has been backburnered for quite a while now since its announcement, we still don't know if it is or isn't going to happen, but the more time goes on, the less likely it seems, I suppose. I think the most recent thing I heard about it was Kathleen Kennedy being interviewed in the run-up to The Acolyte and being asked about it and saying something to the effect of that she and Rian Johnson have conversations on a regular basis, and that definitely left the door open to the possibility of it still happening. It's also easy to think about George Lucas and him saying, why would I make more Star Wars movies when there are so many people who just want to say so many terrible things about you when you do them. And you could imagine Rian Johnson thinking the same thing, but I guess in an interview a year or two ago, he was asked where he sits with that sort of thing. And he says that, yeah, you would think maybe I could think that way, right? That public perception wise, I should definitely want to avoid this because of some terrible things that have been said. But no, actually, I had an incredibly joyful experience with making the movie and everything that happened afterward with it. So he is still a fan of the franchise and still thinks very fondly of the experience. So here we are 7 years down the line from the release of The Last Jedi. And whereas I do think that it's going to be inextricably linked with this idea of it being a tipping point for online discourse and how that is handled on social media and in mainstream media, I do hope that it and the sequel movies 7 years, 17 years from now are going to receive an additional level of appreciation, the kind that we're seeing with the prequel movies right now. I definitely think it's deserving of it, and I'd love to know what you think. So please, if you're catching this on YouTube, comments are right there. Spotify, there's a Q&A section, drop an A right there. If you're catching this anywhere else, please head over to the blog post for this show's episode at sw7x7.com and let me know what you think. And that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast, and it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for this episode, as always. And may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.